The Kepler system had once been home to 12 terraformed moons orbiting a massive gas giant, supporting a combined population of over 40 million beings from 6 different species. Now it was a graveyard of half-consumed worlds where the Devourer fleet methodically stripped away everything that had taken centuries to build. Captain Lisa Rodriguez floated in the command center of the coalition vessel Harmony's Edge, watching tactical displays that showed the largest space battle in galactic history about to unfold. The ship had originally been designed for deep space exploration, but human engineers had spent weeks retrofitting it with weapons systems and armor plating. It still looked more like a research vessel than a warship, but it would have to do. Fleet status report, Lisa called to Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner, who had taken over the tactical coordination station. 43 ships ready for engagement, Turner reported. Mixed crews, human command officers, alien technical specialists. They're scared, but they're ready to fight. The fleet that surrounded them was unlike anything that had ever existed in Coalition space. Zilani exploration vessels bristled with hastily mounted weapons. Thornari agricultural ships had been converted into mobile command centers. Even the crystalline Variks had contributed vessels that could generate focused energy beams from their living crystal halls. But the most important change wasn't in the ships. It was in the crews. For 3 months, Colonel Beth Warren had been training Coalition personnel in human military doctrine, and the results were remarkable. Aliens who had spent their entire lives avoiding conflict had learned to think tactically, react quickly, and follow orders without debate. Dr. Ryan Mitchell monitored communications from his position at the psychology station, a role that didn't exist in Coalition vessels until humans started redesigning their command structures. Crew morale is holding steady, he reported. They're still afraid of the violence, but they understand why it's necessary. The breakthrough had come when Dr. Amanda Cross suggested reframing the battle in terms that Coalition species could accept. Instead of teaching them to be aggressive, the humans taught them to think of combat as protective intervention, using controlled force to defend innocent beings who couldn't defend themselves. Devourer fleet contact in 15 minutes, Turner announced. 7 heavy construction vessels, escort ships, and 1 command vessel. They're maintaining standard harvesting formation. Through the forward screens, the human command team could see the massive Devourer ships approaching the gas giant's inner moons. Each vessel was the size of a small city, constructed from the processed remains of consumed worlds. They moved with mechanical precision, following programming that had driven them to harvest dozens of systems across the galactic rim. Ambassador Helen Torres stood beside Captain Rodriguez, wearing a hastily designed combat suit that allowed her to serve as diplomatic liaison during the battle. The role was uniquely human. Coalition species had never needed diplomats in combat situations because they had never fought wars. Sage Prime Kelthon is requesting final confirmation, Helen reported. The Coalition Council has authorized the use of force, but they want assurance that will minimize destruction wherever possible. Lisa nodded grimly. Even facing extinction, the Coalition couldn't completely abandon their peaceful nature. Tell them we'll do our best, but the Devourers don't negotiate. If we don't stop them here, they'll consume the core worlds within weeks. The Devourer fleet reached the first moon and began their standard harvesting operation. Massive mining beams reduced the surface to component atoms while processing ships collected the raw materials. They worked with the same methodical efficiency they had shown at dozens of other worlds, ignoring the approaching Coalition fleet as if it didn't exist. All ships, this is Harmony's Edge, Lisa broadcast on the fleet communication channel. Remember your training. Follow your human coordinators, trust your instincts, and protect each other. Today we fight not for conquest or territory, but for the right of peaceful beings to exist without fear. The battle began with long-range missile strikes from converted Kitharin cargo vessels. The weapons were crude by human standards, but effective enough to damage Devourer ship exteriors. The mechanical vessels responded by launching clouds of defensive drones, tiny automated fighters that swarmed toward the Coalition fleet like angry insects. Evasive maneuvers, Turner called out as the first wave of drones reached their position. All ships scatter and regroup according to Pattern Delta. The Coalition fleet broke apart into smaller tactical groups, each led by a human officer who had spent months learning alien capabilities and limitations. The Zilani ships used their superior speed to draw drone attacks away from the slower vessels. The Thornari command ships coordinated defensive networks while staying safely behind the main battle line. Colonel Warren commanded a strike force of modified exploration vessels that had been equipped with ramming capabilities. Her mission was the most dangerous. Get close enough to the Devourer command vessel to plant charges that could disrupt its central processing systems. Warren's team is making their approach run, Turner reported as he tracked multiple battles across the tactical display. They're taking heavy fire but maintaining formation. The Devourers fought with mechanical precision but no creativity. They had standard responses for standard threats, but they had never encountered an enemy that combined alien technology with human tactical thinking. Coalition ships performed maneuvers that their original designers had never imagined, while human officers made split-second decisions that kept the enemy guessing. The turning point came when Warren's strike force reached the Devourer command vessel. Instead of trying to penetrate its heavy armor, they used a tactic that no rational species would attempt. They flew their ships directly into the enemy vessel's mining beams, using the Devourer's own weapons to create breaches in their hull. Ramming speed, Warren ordered as her ship Fierce Harmony accelerated toward the massive enemy vessel. Around her, alien crew members, who had never imagined dying for a cause, prepared to sacrifice their lives to save worlds they had never seen. The explosion when Warren's ship hit the command vessel's core processing center was visible across the entire system. The Devourer fleet immediately stopped their harvesting operations as their coordination network failed. For the first time in their recorded history, the mechanical intelligence was forced to retreat rather than risk losing more vessels to an enemy they couldn't predict or counter. The Coalition fleet was devastated but victorious. 27 ships had been destroyed and over 3,000 beings had died, but they had achieved something that military experts throughout the galaxy had believed impossible. They had forced the Devourers to withdraw. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler, Ambassador Torres stood before the Coalition Council in a ceremony that had no precedent in galactic history. The chamber had been rebuilt to accommodate new member species, refugees from Devourer attacks, who had been saved by Coalition defense forces under human command. Today we formally establish the Guardian Protocol, Sage Prime Kelthan announced, his crystalline form displaying patterns of gold and silver that represented hope and renewal. Earth will maintain its independence while serving as the Coalition's military arm and crisis response force. The arrangement was unprecedented but necessary. The Coalition's peaceful nature was precious and worth protecting. But the galaxy was a dangerous place that required guardians who understood violence and weren't afraid to use it when peaceful solutions failed. Captain Rodriguez, now Admiral Rodriguez, commanded the new Terran defense fleet from her flagship Terra Nova. The ship had been extensively rebuilt with both human and alien technology, creating hybrid vessels that combined the best of both civilizations. Her crews were mixed human-alien teams who had learned to work together during the desperate months of the Devourer crisis. Dr. Mitchell had established the Interspecies Military Academy on Unity Prime, teaching Coalition species the psychological foundations of effective military leadership. His students included beings who had never conceived of violence, learning how to make life and death decisions under pressure. Dr. Cross had become the Coalition's primary expert on hostile contact scenarios, developing protocols for dealing with aggressive species that couldn't be reasoned with. Her work had already proven valuable as reports came in of other mechanical intelligences and predatory species on the galactic rim. The story concluded with a new signal detected by the deep space monitoring arrays, this time a distress call from an unexplored region of space. As Admiral Rodriguez prepared the defense fleet to respond, she reflected on how much had changed since that first transmission. From the galactic core, the Coalition had sent a signal hoping to find another peaceful species to join their community of harmony and cooperation. Instead, they had discovered that the galaxy was full of threats that required a different kind of response. They had found humanity and learned that sometimes the galaxy needed its beasts. The Terra Nova and her sister ships departed Unity Prime on their rescue mission, carrying mixed crews of humans and aliens who had learned to combine peaceful intentions with warrior skills. The Coalition Council chamber had transformed into a scene of barely controlled panic. Representatives from dozens of species filled the curved walls with their various forms of distressed communication, flashing lights, harmonic wails, rustling, Leaves and clicking sounds that Dr. Amanda Cross's translation systems were struggling to process simultaneously. Sage Prime Kelthon's crystalline form pulsed with rapid patterns of red and orange light as he tried to maintain order. "Please, honored delegates, we must approach this crisis with calm deliberation." His translated words appeared in the air, but the glowing symbols flickered with uncertainty. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood with the human delegation near the center of the chamber, watching the alien response with growing concern. The Coalition's long-range sensors had detected the approaching Devourer fleet 6 hours ago, and they had spent the entire time in increasingly frantic discussions about how to respond. "They've been debating whether to send a welcome message," Colonel Beth Warren whispered to Ambassador Helen Torres. "A welcome message to ships that just harvested 3 entire star systems." The Devourers were unlike anything in Coalition records. Their ships were massive geometric constructs that seemed to be built from the remains of consumed worlds. Metal and stone and crystallized atmosphere fused together into vessels the size of small moons. They moved through space, consuming everything in their path, breaking down planets and stars into raw materials for their ever-growing fleet. Dr. Ryan Mitchell had been monitoring the Coalition's response protocols, and what he discovered was deeply troubling. "They don't have any military doctrine," he reported to the human team. "Their entire defense strategy is based on communication and conflict avoidance." Diplomatic guide. Seren approached the humans with obvious desperation in her graceful movements. Her silver eyes had taken on a darker hue that Amanda's cultural database identified as extreme stress. "Perhaps your species could assist with communication efforts," she suggested. "Your rapid decision-making abilities might help us establish contact more efficiently." "Contact with what?" Dr. Mitchell asked directly. "Those ships have been transmitting the same message for weeks. It's not a greeting or a negotiation. It's a consumption schedule." The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The Devourers had sent exactly 1 transmission since entering Coalition space, and Amanda had decoded it within minutes. It was a simple statement of intent: coordinates, timelines, and resource extraction quotas. They weren't interested in communication, diplomacy, or peaceful coexistence. They were interested in raw materials, and they considered inhabited planets to be particularly rich sources. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner had been studying the Coalition's defense capabilities, and his findings were even more alarming than their diplomatic paralysis. "They don't have weapons," he reported to Captain Rodriguez. "I mean, they literally don't have any combat-capable vessels. Their defense fleet consists of research ships and rescue vessels. The Coalition had never needed weapons because they had never encountered an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with. Their expansion into the galaxy had been carefully managed, with extensive communication and cultural exchange preceding any contact. They had avoided aggressive species entirely, creating a self-selecting community of peaceful civilizations. But the Devourers weren't part of any civilization. They were a mechanical intelligence that had emerged from some unknown catastrophe on the galactic rim. They consumed worlds not out of malice or territorial ambition, but simply because that was their programming. They were as unstoppable as a force of nature, and just as impossible to negotiate with. The first Devourer attack came 72 hours after their initial detection. The agricultural world of New Harvest was a peaceful planet inhabited by 3 million Thornari colonists who had spent centuries developing sustainable farming techniques that worked in harmony with the native ecosystem. The Devourers arrived in a fleet of 7 massive ships and began their harvesting operation immediately. There was no warning, no demand for surrender, no attempt at communication. They simply began breaking down the planet's atmosphere and surface into component materials while the inhabitants screamed for help on every available frequency. Coalition rescue ships arrived to find the planet half consumed, and the Devourer fleet methodically processing the remains. The rescue vessels transmitted every peaceful greeting in their databases, offered to establish communication protocols, and even tried to negotiate resource-sharing agreements. The Devourers ignored them completely and continued their work. 3 million Thornari died in less than 6 hours. The news reached Unity Prime through frantic transmissions from the surviving rescue ships, and the effect on the Coalition Council was devastating. Many delegates simply shut down their communication systems and retreated to their quarters. Others began rapid evacuation of their home systems. The Zilani started making high-pitched keening sounds that their translators rendered as expressions of absolute despair. "They don't know how to fight," Colonel Warren observed as she watched the alien responses. "It's not that they won't fight. They literally don't know how." Ambassador Torres found herself in the unprecedented position of representing the only military-capable species in a galaxy under attack. "Sage Prime Kelthon has requested a private meeting," she announced to her team. "I think they're about to ask for something they never thought they'd need." The private meeting took place in Kelthon's personal chambers, a space filled with living, crystal formations that responded to his emotional states with shifting patterns of light and color. Currently, the crystals were displaying deep purples and blacks that Amanda's database identified as grief and fear. "Ambassador Torres," Kelthon began, his words appearing more slowly than usual. "The Coalition faces an unprecedented crisis. We have spent 10,000 cycles building a civilization based on peace and cooperation. We have no experience with entities that cannot be reasoned with." Helen waited patiently for him to continue, understanding that Coalition communication moved at a much different pace than human conversation. "Your species has demonstrated capabilities that are unknown among Coalition members," Kelthon continued. "Rapid decision-making, hierarchical organization, and what our analysts describe as strategic aggression. We request your assistance in developing a response to this threat." "What kind of assistance?" Helen asked carefully. The crystals around Kelthon pulsed with deep red light that the translator identified as shame and desperate need. "We need you to teach us how to fight." The request was unprecedented in Coalition history. For 10,000 years they had solved every problem through communication, negotiation, and peaceful cooperation. Now they were asking the newest and most aggressive species they had ever encountered to help them learn the arts of war. "Captain." Rodriguez assembled the human team in the Terra Nova's briefing room to discuss their response. The ship felt strangely comfortable after days in the alien environment of Unity Prime, with its familiar gravity, atmosphere, and the subtle vibrations of human-built machinery. "They're asking us to become their military," Dr. Mitchell summarized. "Not just advisors or consultants. They want us to take command of their response to the Devourer threat." Colonel Warren spread out tactical displays showing Coalition space and the approaching Devourer fleets. "They have the ships and the industrial capacity," she noted. "What they don't have is anyone who understands combat doctrine, military organization, or strategic thinking. The question is whether we can teach them fast enough," Turner added. "The Devourers are moving through Coalition space systematically. At their current rate, they'll reach the core systems in less than 3 months." Amanda had been monitoring Devourer communications and analyzing their behavioral patterns. "They're not just consuming randomly," she reported. "They're following a specific pattern, targeting worlds with the highest concentrations of rare elements and industrial capacity. They're building toward something." Outside the Terra Nova's windows, Unity Prime continued its slow rotation against the backdrop of stars. Millions of alien beings lived and worked in the massive station, representatives of dozens of species who had never known war, violence, or the need to fight for survival. In a few hours, Colonel Warren would begin the first military training sessions in Coalition history, teaching peaceful aliens how to kill efficiently and die bravely. Captain Rodriguez would take command of ships designed for exploration and try to turn them into weapons of war. For the first time since leaving Earth, the human delegation understood why they had really been invited to join the galactic community. The Coalition hadn't been looking for another peaceful species to add to their harmony. They had been looking for guardians. The Coalition Council Chamber was a marvel of alien architecture, with curved walls that seemed to flow like water, and a ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the galaxy's spiral arms. Sage Prime Kelthon's crystalline form dominated the center of the room, while representatives from dozens of species arranged themselves in a complex pattern that Dr. Ryan Mitchell realized was designed to prevent any single group from appearing dominant. Ambassador. Helen Torres sat with her human delegation at a curved table that had been specially constructed for their use. The furniture was beautiful but uncomfortable, clearly designed by beings who had different ideas about proper seating arrangements. Behind them, Dr. Amanda Cross worked quietly with her translation equipment, monitoring the various alien communications that filled the chamber. The evaluation process has been used for over 10,000 cycles, Kelthon explained, his words appearing as glowing symbols in the air above the assembly. Each prospective species must demonstrate their compatibility with coalition values of harmony, cooperation, and peaceful resolution of conflicts. Diplomatic guide Seren approached the human table with what appeared to be a data tablet, though it looked more like a sheet of living metal that responded to touch with ripples of colored light. The first scenario involves resource allocation, she explained. 5 species need access to a rare mineral found on a single planet. Each species has a legitimate claim, but there is not enough for everyone. How would humanity resolve this situation? Helen studied the scenario carefully. According to the data, the Variks needed the mineral for their reproductive crystals. The Thornari required it for a medicine that prevented a deadly plant disease. The Catharans used it in their hive construction. The Etherians needed it to maintain their containment technology, and the Zelani required it for their deep space navigation systems. Colonel Beth Warren leaned over and whispered, "This is a no-win scenario. They're testing how we handle impossible situations." But Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner was already sketching out ideas on his tablet. His tactical training had taught him to look for unconventional solutions when conventional ones failed. "What if we don't think of this as a resource allocation problem?" he suggested quietly. "What if we treat it as a logistics and trade optimization challenge?" Helen spent 15 minutes reviewing the scenario while the alien delegates waited patiently. Coalition decision-making apparently moved at a much slower pace than human problem-solving. Finally, she stood to present humanity's solution. "We propose establishing a mining consortium," Helen announced. "Each species contributes their unique capabilities to extract and process the mineral more efficiently. The Kitharans provide mining expertise, the Variks offer crystallization technology, the Thornari contribute biological processing methods, the Etherians handle transportation, and the Zelani coordinate distribution. Everyone gets what they need and there's surplus for future emergencies." The chamber fell silent. Kelthon's crystalline form pulsed with rapidly changing colors as he processed the human response. Other delegates began communicating in their various languages, creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, light patterns, and harmonic tones. "Fascinating," Seren said finally. "Most species require several days to reach a consensus on such matters. You presented a complete solution in minutes." Dr. Mitchell noticed the undertone of concern in her voice. The aliens weren't impressed by human efficiency. They were worried about it. He began to understand that in coalition culture, the process of reaching a decision was considered as important as the decision itself. The second test took place in a massive simulation chamber that could recreate any environment in perfect detail. The humans found themselves in a disaster scenario, where a space station was losing life support and needed to be evacuated. Thousands of alien civilians were in danger, and panic was beginning to spread through the population. Captain Lisa Rodriguez took command immediately, her voice cutting through the chaos with crisp, authoritative orders. "Warren, secure the evacuation routes. Turner, coordinate with the transport ships. Torres, handle civilian communication. Mitchell, assess crowd psychology and recommend crowd control measures." The human team moved with military precision, establishing clear chains of command and efficient evacuation procedures. They identified the most critical areas first, organized the civilians into manageable groups, and maintained calm through decisive leadership and clear communication. Within 30 minutes, they had successfully evacuated the entire station without losing a single civilian. The simulation ended with all objectives achieved and minimal psychological trauma to the evacuees. But when the humans emerged from the simulation chamber, they found the watching alien delegates in a state of visible distress. The Zelani were huddled together in nervous groups, their silver eyes wide with concern. The Thornari had darkened their leaf patterns to deep purples and browns that Amanda's translator identified as expressions of anxiety. "Your efficiency is remarkable," Kelthon said slowly. "However, your methods of organization and command structure are quite different from coalition norms." Dr. Mitchell approached Seren after the test, hoping to understand the alien reactions better. Were we supposed to fail that scenario? He asked directly. Saran's graceful features showed confusion and something that might have been fear. No species has ever completed the evacuation simulation so quickly, she admitted. Most take several hours to establish proper consensus among all participants. Your immediate acceptance of hierarchical authority and rapid decision-making is unprecedented. How would coalition species handle the same situation? Mitchell asked. We would form committees to discuss the best approaches, Saran explained. Representatives from each affected group would need to reach agreement on evacuation procedures. Consensus building ensures that no individual feels excluded from the decision-making process. Mitchell felt a chill of understanding. Even in a life-or-death emergency? Especially then. Panic and hasty decisions lead to greater harm than careful deliberation. That evening, the human delegation gathered in their quarters to discuss what they had learned. Amanda had spent the day analyzing coalition databases and monitoring alien communications, and her findings painted a troubling picture. I don't think any coalition species has ever faced a real military threat, she reported. Their entire civilization is built around preventing conflicts before they start. They have arbitration councils, mediation protocols, and elaborate systems for ensuring that no one ever feels threatened enough to become aggressive. Colonel Warren checked her weapons for the third time that day, a nervous habit that had developed since arriving at Unity Prime. What happens when they run into something that can't be reasoned with? She asked. They don't, Dr. Mitchell replied grimly. Look at their expansion patterns, their contact protocols, their whole approach to galactic civilization. They only make contact with species that have already demonstrated peaceful intentions. They've created a self-selecting community of non-aggressive species. Captain Rodriguez studied the star charts that showed coalition territory. It was impressive in scope, covering thousands of systems and billions of beings. But she noticed something troubling about its boundaries. They've never expanded beyond the galactic core region, she observed. Everything on the outer rim is listed as unexplored or avoided, because that's where the dangerous species live, Turner concluded. The ones who shoot first and ask questions later. The ones who fight back. Ambassador Torres reviewed the formal evaluation criteria that Kelthon had provided. The tests were designed to measure cooperation, consensus building, conflict avoidance, and respect for group harmony. By human standards, they were reasonable requirements for a peaceful society. By coalition standards, humanity was failing spectacularly. They're not evaluating whether we can be peaceful, Helen realized. They're evaluating whether we think like they do, and we don't. The third test was scheduled for the following day, but it never took place. Long-range sensors detected something approaching. Coalition space from the galactic rim, a massive fleet of ships, moving at incredible speed toward populated. Systems emergency alarms began sounding throughout Unity Prime as the coalition faced something they had never encountered before, an external threat that couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or peacefully resolved. The Devourers had found them. As alien delegates rushed to emergency assemblies and coalition defense forces scrambled to respond, Dr. Mitchell watched the organized chaos with growing understanding. The coalition had created a paradise of peaceful cooperation, but they had never learned how to fight. For the first time since arriving at Unity Prime, he began to wonder if the galaxy had invited the wrong species to join their community. Perhaps what they really needed wasn't another peaceful race to add to their harmony. Perhaps they needed predators. The Terra Nova dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Centauri system, and every human aboard pressed against the observation windows to stare at Unity Prime. The space station was enormous, easily the size of Earth's moon, with spiraling arms that stretched out into space like the petals of a metal flower. Lights moved along its surface in patterns that seemed almost alive, and dozens of alien ships docked at ports along its outer ring. Captain Lisa Rodriguez felt her breath catch in her throat as she watched the alien vessels. Some looked like crystalline sculptures that caught and reflected starlight, while others were smooth, organic shapes that seemed to pulse with their own inner glow. One ship appeared to be made entirely of some kind of living coral that grew in impossible geometric patterns. My God, whispered Dr. Amanda Cross from her position at the communications station. We're really not alone. A transmission came through the ship's speakers in perfect English. though the voice had an odd musical quality that made it sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Welcome, children of Earth. I am diplomatic guide Seren of the Zilani. We have been waiting many cycles to meet you. Please follow the guidance beacon to Docking Bay 7. Kunidisur, docking process took 2 hours because the Zilani insisted on following detailed safety protocols that seemed designed to prevent any possible misunderstanding. The Terra Nova was guided slowly through a series of scanner arrays that examined every inch of the ship, though the scans felt more like medical checkups than security searches. Ambassador Helen Torres led the human delegation through the airlock and into Unity Prime. The first thing that struck her was the smell. Not unpleasant, but completely alien, like ozone mixed with flowers she had never encountered. The air was slightly thicker than Earth normal, and gravity was about 10% lighter. Diplomatic guide Seren was waiting for them in the docking bay. She was tall and slender with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the station's soft lighting. Her features were delicate and symmetrical, and she moved with a grace that reminded Helen of a professional dancer. Large silver eyes dominated her face, and when she smiled, her expression was genuinely warm. "Welcome to Unity Prime," Seren said, extending her hands in what was clearly a greeting gesture. "We are honored to finally meet the builders of the third planet in the Sol system." Colonel Beth Warren stayed close to Ambassador Torres, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The corridor they walked through was wide and curved, with walls that seemed to be made of some kind of living crystal that pulsed gently with soft colors. Other beings moved past them, and Beth's military training cataloged each one as a potential threat or ally. The Variks were impossible to miss, crystalline beings that looked like living sculptures made of colored glass. They communicated by changing the colors and patterns of light that flowed through their bodies, and their movements created musical tones that served as a secondary language. Dr. Ryan Mitchell was fascinated by them and immediately began taking notes on their behavior patterns. A group of Etherians drifted past in specialized containment suits that held their gaseous forms. They were clouds of glowing particles that shifted and swirled inside transparent containers, and they seemed to communicate through changes in their internal patterns. Beth noticed that they gave the humans a wide berth, as if they were nervous about getting too close. The Thornari were easier to understand because they looked somewhat like earth plants, though they walked upright and had complex root systems instead of feet. Their bark-like skin was covered in patterns of leaves and small flowers, and they moved slowly and deliberately through the station's garden areas. The welcome ceremony took place in a vast circular chamber at the station's heart. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered to meet the humans, and Helen felt overwhelmed by the sheer diversity of life forms. Some aliens were so strange that she couldn't immediately tell which end was which, while others were surprisingly familiar. Sage Prime Kelthon of the Variks served as the ceremony's host. He was an ancient being whose crystalline form contained swirling galaxies of colored light, and when he spoke, his words appeared as floating symbols in the air that were simultaneously translated into dozens of languages. For countless generations, the coalition has grown through peaceful contact and mutual understanding, Kelthon announced. Today we welcome a new species to our community of harmony and cooperation. The ceremony proceeded smoothly until one of the Catharen delegates approached Ambassador Torres to present a ceremonial gift. The Kithrans were large insectoid beings with multiple arms and chitinous exoskeletons that gleamed like polished metal. This particular delegate was nearly 8 feet tall and moved with quick, precise motions. Colonel Warren saw the alien approaching rapidly and reacted on pure instinct. She stepped forward and placed herself between the Catharan and the ambassador, her hand moving to her sidearm. The movement was subtle and professional, but every alien in the chamber noticed it immediately. The effect was dramatic. Several of the smaller species backed away quickly, their various forms of communication creating a wave of nervous energy that spread through the room. The Etherians' containment suits began flashing warning colors, and even the normally calm Thornari rustled their leaves in what was clearly a distress response. "My apologies," Helen said quickly, recognizing the mistake. Colonel Warren was simply being cautious. "We meant no offense." The Kithran delegate stepped back and made a series of clicking sounds that Dr. Amanda Cross's translation device rendered as "no harm intended. Gift offering postponed for better circumstances." Dr. Mitchell watched the reactions of the alien species with growing concern. He had spent years studying human psychology and body language, and he was beginning to understand something troubling about this first meeting. The aliens weren't just surprised by Warren's defensive reaction, they were genuinely frightened. During the cultural exchange session that followed, the humans were invited to demonstrate aspects of Earth culture. Helen had prepared a presentation about human art and music, but several young crew members suggested showing the aliens some Earth sports instead. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner volunteered to organize a basketball demonstration with 5 other crew members. They set up a simple court in one of the station's recreational areas and began playing a casual game while the aliens watched. The reaction was immediate and alarming. As the humans ran back and forth across the court, jumping for the ball and making physical contact during play, the watching aliens began showing clear signs of distress. The Zilani backed away from the demonstration area, their silver eyes wide with what could only be described as fear. When Turner accidentally bumped into another player while going for a rebound, several of the smaller alien species actually fled the area entirely. The Thornari began making low humming sounds that their translators identified as emergency calls, and even the massive Catharan seemed nervous about the display of human physicality. "Stop the game," Dr. Mitchell told Turner quietly. "We're scaring them." As the basketball demonstration ended, Saran approached the human delegation with obvious reluctance. Her graceful movements had become hesitant, and her silver eyes kept darting toward the exits. "Your species displays remarkable coordination and strategic thinking," she said carefully. "However, your methods of physical interaction are quite intense for most coalition members. Perhaps we could explore less energetic forms of cultural exchange." That evening, as the human delegation gathered in their assigned quarters aboard Unity Prime, the full scope of their problem became clear. Dr. Mitchell had spent the day observing alien behavior and making careful notes about their reactions to human presence. "They're afraid of us," he announced to the group. "Not afraid that we'll attack them deliberately, but afraid of what we represent. I don't think any of these species evolved from predators." Amanda pulled up her analysis of the alien languages and cultural databases they had been given access to. "Ryan's right. Look at their social structures, their conflict resolution methods, even their technology. Everything is designed around cooperation and consensus building. They've never had to deal with a species that thinks like we do." Colonel Warren sat at the table cleaning her sidearm, a habit that helped her think through complex problems. "The question is whether they'll decide we're too dangerous to have around. If they do, we're a long way from home and seriously outnumbered." Ambassador Torres reviewed the day's diplomatic notes while considering their options. Outside their windows, Unity Prime continued its slow rotation against the backdrop of stars, home to dozens of species who had lived in peace for thousands of years. Tomorrow they would begin the formal evaluation process that would determine whether humanity could join the Galactic Harmony Coalition. Based on what they had learned today, Helen wasn't sure they would pass the test. Dr. Amanda Cross pushed her chair back from the monitoring station and rubbed her tired eyes. She had been working for 14 hours straight at the Horizon Watch deep space facility, listening to the same cosmic background noise that had filled the universe for billions of years. The coffee in her mug had gone cold hours ago, and the night shift was almost over. She was about to shut down her equipment when something made her pause. There was a pattern in the static. Amanda leaned forward and adjusted the frequency controls. The signal was faint but definitely artificial. It came from somewhere near the galactic core, over 25,000 light-years away. Her hands moved quickly across the control panel as she isolated the transmission and began recording. The pattern was complex, mathematical, and clearly made by intelligent beings. "Computer, wake up Commander Sullivan," she said to the station's AI system. Jake Sullivan arrived in the monitoring room 10 minutes later, still pulling on his uniform jacket. He was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of calm presence that made people trust him during emergencies. As the commanding officer of Horizon Watch, he had seen plenty of false alarms over the years, but something in Amanda's voice had made him hurry. "What do you have, Doc?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Amanda played the signal for him. The sounds filled the room with a series of mathematical sequences, prime numbers and what seemed like star charts encoded in radio waves. But there was more. Hidden in the transmission were images, three-dimensional maps and something that looked like written language. "How long has this been coming in?" Jake asked. "About 40 minutes. It's getting stronger, which means they're using a lot of power to send it. This isn't some random transmission. Someone wants us to hear this." Jake picked up the secure phone and called Earth. Within an hour, teams of scientists, linguists, and military experts were working around the clock to decode the alien message. The news spread quickly through government channels, and soon the president herself was getting hourly updates. Dr. Ryan Mitchell arrived from the University of California 3 days later. He was a behavioral psychologist who specialized in first contact scenarios, though until now his work had been purely theoretical. He was a quiet man in his 40s who wore thick glasses and always carried a notebook. "The mathematical parts are easy," Ryan explained to the growing team of experts. "They're showing us they understand physics, chemistry, and astronomy. But the really interesting part is how they structured the message. They're being very careful not to seem threatening." Amanda had been working without sleep for almost a week, surviving on coffee and excitement. She had managed to decode most of the star charts and some of the written language. The aliens used a complex system of symbols that represented both sounds and concepts. "I think I know what they're saying," she announced during the morning briefing. "They call themselves the Galactic Harmony Coalition. They've been watching us for a very long time, and they think we're ready to join them." The room fell silent. Jake leaned forward in his chair. "Join them how?" Amanda pulled up the decoded sections on her computer screen. "They want to meet. They've given us coordinates for a space station in the Centauri system. They call it Unity Prime." The next few weeks were chaos. World leaders argued about how to respond. Some wanted to ignore the message completely, while others demanded immediate action. The military wanted to send warships, while scientists insisted on a peaceful diplomatic mission. Captain Lisa Rodriguez was chosen to command humanity's response. She was one of Earth's most experienced deep space pilots, a woman in her early 40s who had spent more time in space than on the planet's surface. She had dark hair, steady hands, and the kind of reputation that made other pilots want to follow her into dangerous situations. "We're not going in blind," Lisa told her crew during their first meeting aboard the starship Terra Nova. "But we're also not going in afraid. This is the biggest moment in human history, and we're going to do it right." The Terra Nova was Earth's newest and most advanced starship. It had been designed for long-range exploration, with comfortable living quarters, advanced laboratories, and enough firepower to handle most emergencies. The crew of 50 included diplomats, scientists, linguists, and security personnel. Colonel Beth Warren was put in charge of ship security. She was a veteran soldier who had served in 3 different conflicts, a woman with short blonde hair and scars on her hands from combat training. She didn't trust easily, and she had serious doubts about meeting aliens who had been watching Earth without revealing themselves. "Something bothers me about this invitation," Beth told Lisa during a private meeting. "Why now? What changed? And why are they being so careful about not seeming threatening?" "That usually means someone is." Ambassador Helen Torres was selected to lead the diplomatic mission. She was a career diplomat who spoke 6 languages and had negotiated peace treaties on 3 continents. She was an elegant woman in her 50s who believed that most problems could be solved through careful conversation and a mutual understanding. As the Terra Nova prepared for departure, intelligence agencies intercepted more alien communications. The signals weren't meant for human ears, but Amanda and her team had learned enough of the alien language to understand pieces of the transmissions. "They're talking about us," Amanda reported to the command team. "Not all of them are happy that we've been invited. Some of them use a word that roughly translates to the violent ones or the predator spawn." Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner, the ship's tactical officer, studied the intercepts carefully. He was a young man with dark skin and bright eyes who had graduated at the top of his class from the Naval Academy. "They're afraid of us," he concluded. "The question is why." The final preparations took 3 months. The Terra Nova was loaded with gifts from Earth, cultural artifacts, scientific data, and examples of human art and music. The crew trained constantly, running through every possible scenario they could imagine. On the day of departure, crowds gathered at spaceports around the world to watch the launch. The Terra Nova lifted off from the Kennedy Space Center on a clear morning in October, carrying humanity's hopes and fears toward the stars. As Earth grew smaller behind them, Amanda stood in the observation deck and watched their home planet disappear into the darkness. Somewhere ahead of them, an entire galaxy of alien civilizations waited to meet the newest members of their community. She wondered if they would still want to meet humans after they learned what Earth's children were really like.